More weather as we head south, and certainly more folks heading north.
Jacob Soboroff from a moving car on the interstate. Jacob, thanks. Meteorologist Bonnie Schneider has joined us. First of all, a little bit of a travel log about where he is. Some of the most beautiful coastline in this country is coastal Georgia and South Carolina, largely because it's squishy, it's marshland.
It's very pristine.
Yeah, and yet that water's going to get pushed up in there where they can't handle it.
Right, especially Tybee Island. Absolutely, we're going to be seeing that. It's interesting we mentioned barrier islands because if you go further south into Florida and look towards Jensen Beach, which is about 5 miles north of Stewart, that's where we're getting actually some stronger winds. A report of a 71-mile-per-hour wind gust there in the coastal areas of Jensen Beach. So that's a barrier island. So we're starting to see some of those stronger wind gusts come through. We mentioned the one in Stewart at 55 miles per hour, not too far away.
Yeah. Now, when you look at this eye, obviously, even since your shift started, since we've been here, it is getting demonstrably closer to the coastline. Fort Pierce getting some good winds, I imagine, and all our friends in Melbourne are about to see what this storm can do. What story does the eye tell you?
It tells me something very important. The potential is that the storm might be weakening, and that is because I believe that the storm went through what we call an eye wall replacement cycle. And a lot of times we use the example of an ice skater. When they want to go faster, they pull their arms in really tight. So when you see the eye wall that's smaller, that's when you know the storm is more intense. When their arms are out or it's wider, perhaps we're seeing some weakening. So let's take a closer look at the eye wall, and you can see one of the reasons we think the eye wall replacement cycle has occurred, which can take days to occur. But looking at in just the last few frames, you can start to see a merger here between the two bands of rain right here. So that shows that perhaps we are seeing that. And that's a good sign. The only negative thing I mentioned earlier is that it does mean that the area where we're seeing some stronger winds, not the strongest that we potentially could see, but strong winds might be a bit larger. And we're looking at right now just the beginning of those really heavy rain bands coming into Fort Pierce at this hour. They're about to just hammer Melbourne, where one of our correspondents are. And of course, we're seeing some of the outer bands, some of the rain coming in all the way inland to Tampa. So that is a reason why we still have the hurricane warnings up for Orlando and then certainly Daytona Beach, because the movement continues to be to the northwest, and eventually Daytona Beach really likely to see as the storm, whether or not it hits the periphery of Florida or it makes landfall, though most of the models are now saying that it'll stay to the east, we're still going to see the brunt of this long trek of the storm just paralleling the coast. So we have a better look at what's going on with the storm over here. We can show you still a Category 4 storm right now, 60 miles to the southeast of Fort Pierce. So let's take a closer look. Here's the storm, and here's the latest conditions and track. The movement, as I mentioned, to the northwest. Still a powerful Category 2 or a Category 3 storm going into the weekend hours. Eventually a Category 1. Be nice to see it further to the east. But if you're just joining us now, the track a little bit to the east. We still have that cone, though, covering most of Melbourne, Jacksonville, Daytona Beach, all the way into coastal South Carolina and coastal Georgia. Storm surge still a concern, whether or not the storm makes landfall. That piling up of water is so important to be just aware of, and that's why we saw these evacuations, because if you're on any kind of coastal area, 7 to 11 feet, areas that are completely dry normally, maybe you take a walk on the beach or on a pier, covered in water. This is particularly true for Georgia and South Carolina. As Brian mentioned, some beautiful areas, Hilton Head, down through Savannah, Brunswick. We could see a lot of storm surge here, partially because of the topography and the way the land is structured with all these little rivers and inlets in here. The water can really tend to pile up quickly, and we've seen that with other storms. Now, as we go to the north, we are still looking at that storm surge threat, a little bit less for North Carolina, but I am concerned about North Carolina because some of the computer models are showing that we potentially could see a lot of rain there. So just because the storm looks like it's moving away, please be on alert in both of the Carolinas. This is the previous track. You can see this line here. Notice how it jogs to the south and it wiggles a little bit. Very important to note, because typical of hurricanes, we could see a little bit of a movement further to the west. Right now the storm is moving to the northwest, but again, it's so close now. It's less than about 75 miles, at least the center is, to Florida. So we're going to see those little wiggles and wobbles as we go through. Right now still a Category 4, and that's why we still have the warnings. And of course, in the latest advisory, some of the watches were extended a little bit further north. The tropical storm warning now goes all the way into North Carolina, but the warnings for hurricane warnings remain for Savannah all the way down through West Palm Beach and, of course, Lake Okeechobee. Looking at the rain amounts, I mentioned some of the threat that we're facing. 10 inches plus. Some computer models say even more than that for coastal sections of the Carolinas, including right here into southern North Carolina, right along the border with South Carolina by Wilmington. So watch out for heavy rain bands here. And depending on where you live, or if you did evacuate the area, perhaps you went 10 or 15 miles inland, what a difference it's going to make in terms of the wind that you'll experience and the rainfall accumulations, particularly from North and South Carolina. Maybe not as much towards Port St. Lucie and West Palm. We are going to see a lot of rain there, but we're looking at some heavier bands, particularly in the Carolinas. And Brian, that has to do with a couple of reasons. One is the way the land mass is shaped with that curve right there over Georgia, but it's also the angle at which the storm is moving. As it's moving to the northwest, it's moving like this, parallel to the coastline here of Florida, but if it's moving in this direction, all that water piles up right here, right where that bend is. So eventually it'll turn away, but unfortunately we're looking at that storm surge threat and that heavy rain threat for the Carolinas and into Georgia. I know we're focused on Florida now, but I just want to let you know sort of what's ahead.
And Bonnie, we were talking about warm water as the fuel for a hurricane last night. The water temperatures are like 86 degrees off the coast of Florida. So it makes sense with about a quarter to a third of this storm over land that it loses its fuel on the back end of its cycle. So, of course, it would reduce in strength.
Well, that's true, but we also have to remember that we're coming over the Gulf Stream, so we still have some of that warmer water to kind of give it a little injection there. But you're right. I think as much as these rain bands interact with land, potentially we could definitely see some weakening. So that's one of the benefits. The negative side of it is that we're seeing those torrential downpours right now in Fort Pierce, and we're getting those strong winds in Stewart and in Vero Beach with those gusts of 55, 54 miles per hour, and in Jensen Beach, 71 mile per hour gusts. So that's just 5 miles further off to the east. So hopefully we will see the trend of weakening, but I'm just still concerned very much about the storm surge, the rainfall amounts, and even the wind damage. I don't want people to look at the track and think, oh, it's no problem. It's still close enough to cause major problems.
All right, and we've still got, as Bunny mentioned, Craig Melvin, Kerry Sanders in Melbourne. We will try to show you what this looks like to be in if we can have their safety assured and get a live shot from both of them. In other news, Fort Lauderdale Airport says they'll open 11 a.m. Friday, and the Indians beat the Red Sox. A quick break for us. We're back with an update on the progress of Hurricane Matthew, a Category 4, right after this.